Yerkir մեդիան ներկայացնում է։
Հարյուր 100 years ago, the Republic of Armenia began its difficult path to independence, one that was full of war and challenging circumstances. In an environment where livelihood and development was nearly impossible, the Republic survived for 2.5 years of constant struggle, which ultimately served as the pillars for existence of both Soviet Armenia and today's Republic. Today, it is clear that without Armenian statehood, the future of Armenian life throughout the world and the ancient civilization it is built upon is endangered. It is our solemn responsibility to maintain and strengthen our homeland, the Armenian nation, and accomplishing that is easier today than it was 100 years ago. A look back into the history pages of the First Armenian Republic will prove this beyond a doubt. Our previous documentary, titled The Origins of Independence, primarily focused on the events leading up to independence, as well as the proclamation of Armenia's independence and the Treaty of Batum, which weighed heavily on the state. In this documentary, we will talk about the young republic's most challenging period, the first months of its existence, when a state was created from the ashes of destruction, at a time when the idea of nation building was first implemented, and when the territory of Armenia was only about 10 to 12,000 square kilometers.
The consolidation of power and establishing true statehood in the newly proclaimed republic were difficult tasks. For centuries, Armenia and the Armenian people were stateless. They lacked administrative and human resources and had no sufficient financial means. The Armenian people were not ready for autonomy. After independence was proclaimed, it was essential for the Armenian people to transition from the centuries-old system of religious community organization, a system deeply rooted in the Armenian reality, to the highest form of a nation's self-organization, to national independent statehood. After the declaration of the independent Republic of Armenia, the Armenian National Council faced two major challenges: the formation of the government and the establishment of the parliament. Though the formation of the full government was postponed until the signing of the Treaty of Batumi, a major agenda item soon became the issue of forming the executive and legislative branches. An Armenian Revolutionary Federation representatives meeting, which was held in Tbilisi in the beginning of June, examined the conditions laid out in the Treaty of Batumi and decided to establish an independent Armenian government and parliament. This was an indication that the ARF wanted to include all the parties within the Armenian National Council represented in the government and the parliament. Both the parliament and the government would be temporary, until it was possible to elect a full parliament through a popular vote, which would then in turn elect a new government. After the Declaration of Independence, the first major dispute between the Armenian political parties arose in parliament over the formation of the first government.
The Armenian Revolutionary Federation, ARF, which at the time was a leading power and held a majority in Armenia's parliament, proposed Hovannes Kachazhnuni as prime minister. Kachazhnuni was a well-respected figure, not only within the ranks of the ARF, but also in other political parties of Armenia, and by governments of Armenia's neighboring countries, including Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Georgia. It was not a coincidence that he was chosen to negotiate in Trabzon and Batumi.
On June 7, 1918, Hovhannes Kachazhnuni was elected prime minister by the Armenian National Assembly with a vote of 13-2 and was assigned to form the cabinet. Kachazhnuni failed to form a national unity cabinet. In an effort to form a more mixed cabinet, Kachazhnuni led negotiations with representatives of the parties throughout the month of June, which unfortunately did not bear fruit.
The Armenian Democratic Party objected to this proposal. They first proposed that the ARF should not be assuming the premiership of Armenia. They pushed for Mikhail Babajanyan to become the prime minister and to form a government around him. The Armenian Democratic Party pushed for the ARF to not have a role in the government and wanted to organize the government itself. It felt that the ARF's time had passed and it was time for a new power and a new face to head the government. However, the Armenian Democratic Party decided not to take part in the government, even though they had made a statement indicating a desire to join in November.
Besides the Armenian People's Party, Hovhannes Kachazhnuni had also offered the Social Revolutionaries and the Social Democrats to join his government. But his offers were rejected for various reasons. In fact, during these critical days, the other parties boycotted the newly formed government and the ARF took on the full responsibility governing the new republic. Realizing that it is impossible to form a government with all parties represented, the Prime Minister was advised to form a temporary government.
The first Armenian government was comprised of the following members: Hovhannes Kachazhnuni, Prime Minister; Alexander Khadisyan, Minister of Foreign Affairs; Aram Manukyan, Minister of Interior; Khachadur Garjikyan, Minister of Finance; Hovhannes Hakhverdian, Minister of Defense; and Krikor Bedrosyan, appointed on July 28, Minister of Justice. The Ministers of Defense and Justice were non-partisan, while the remaining 4 members of the cabinet were members of the ARF. It was decided in the beginning of July that as soon as the cabinet was formed, the government and the National Council would move to the capital, Yerevan. However, since the formation of the cabinet was postponed, the transfer of the authority bodies to Yerevan was put off as well. In mid-July, Kachazhnuni and his cabinet raised the issue of moving the council and the cabinet from Tbilisi to Yerevan. A similar demand was made by the Georgian government, which demonstrated an unfavorable attitude towards the new Armenian authorities.
There were, however, some members of parliament who did not want to leave beautiful Tbilisi and its favorable living conditions and return to the rural and modest city that the new capital Yerevan was at the time. Those members brought forth various arguments that supported the idea of not moving to Yerevan. However, it was clear that the Armenian authorities had to move to the Armenian capital, no matter how underdeveloped the city was.
While the newly formed government arrived in Yerevan, a tremendous amount of organizational work in establishing state structures was already being carried out by Yerevan's Armenian National Council and Aram Manukyan, who was widely regarded as the people's dictator. Manukyan had been working towards the realization of statehood since 1915, when he was the governor of the Van Vaspuragan province. A government-type executive body was created in Yerevan, a temporary body of administrators which had administrative departments for internal affairs, the military, finance, the economy, supplies, and so forth. These served as the basis for the new ministries. During June and July of 1918, the situation in the small, newly independent Republic of Armenia was truly difficult, and the Treaty of Batumi made circumstances even worse. The Armenian population and army were retreating from the territories taken by Turkey and heading toward Yerevan, seeking refuge on the last fragment of land named the Republic of Armenia.
It was difficult. When the winning soldier retreats from the lands that he has won, there is a drop in morale. The Armenians had to leave the area. because the Muslim populations there were vicious towards them, even more so than the Turkish army. The Turkish army was forced to control and quell the Muslim population in the area, as their aggression was causing the Armenians to leave. In addition to Western Armenian emigration, there were also Armenians fleeing from the Ararat region, passing through Turkey. The Armenian army was forced to retreat. Today, many ask why the Armenian army did not try to push for more victories. One reason was that they had run out of ammunition. Sidikian had plans to conquer and convert Alexandropol into a military station from Ani to Gars in order to deliver a powerful blow to the Turkish army. But it didn't come to fruition. The people of Yerevan were enraged, and they were holding demonstrations and protests. It was Aram who was able to calm the people and tell them that the day will come. It will soon come. And indeed it came in the fall.
The heated discussions on the issue of the Armenian leadership's relocation to Yerevan continued at the Armenian National Council in Tbilisi. One of the strong supporters of the move to Yerevan was the head of the government himself, Hovannes Kachaznuni, who vowed that he would only announce the final composition of the government after moving to Yerevan. But still, the National Council had to make a final decision, which continued to be postponed. In Yerevan, patience was wearing thin. A letter, which is kept at the National Archives of Armenia, was sent by Aram Manukyan to the Armenian National Council to Tbilisi in late June 1918, describing the grave situation in Armenia and expressing dissatisfaction with the delay in the relocation of the Armenian government from Tbilisi. The National Council in Yerevan threatened to form a new government if the Armenian leaders do not arrive in Yerevan within 2 weeks.
In the July 6th parliamentary session, it was decided to relocate parliament to Yerevan. Then on July 12th, an opposite decision was made to not relocate. But finally, on July 13th, the final decision was reached to relocate to Yerevan. Hovannes Kachaznuni had a major role to play in this decision. He had actually handed in his official resignation after the July 12th decision not to move to Yerevan. It was only after the final decision that they would relocate to Yerevan on July 16th that he retracted his resignation.
Տեղափոխվել Երևան, Քաջազնին հետ վերցրեցին հրաժարականը.
Due to logistical reasons, the move from Tbilisi to Yerevan officially took place on July 17. The Georgian authorities in Tbilisi, a city which had thrived and flourished for several decades thanks to the Armenian community, gave an unfriendly farewell to the Armenian political elite. Despite an appeal by the Armenian community, Georgian authorities took no steps to facilitate the move to Yerevan, and not a single Georgian representative came to the train station to bid farewell to the Armenian authorities.
The leaders of Armenia left Tbilisi with bitter feelings of humiliation, as if they were leaving an enemy country. At the Poil station, the Georgian frontier guards made things worse by trying to search the wagon of the Armenian government. Only the intervention of the German officer in charge avoided this additional disgrace.
At first glance, this incident, which really represented the inter-ethnic relations of the time, is also a great moral lesson to Armenians and to its future generations. The lesson is simple. One must build his or her home in the homeland and must work tirelessly and with great vigor to invest in that homeland. This is one lesson that we, even a century later, perhaps have not fully learned from and grasped.
Although the Armenian population outnumbered the Georgian population in Tiflis, it was still regarded as a Georgian city. On July 19th, the Armenian parliament, filled with experts and future government leaders, arrived in Yerevan. By their side were German and Turkish generals for protection. They reached Garakilise, and from there they went to Dilijan by car. Passing through Lake Sevan, They reached Yerevan, where Tiro and Yerevan Marshal Shah Khatuni greeted the future Armenian parliament and government in Kanakir.
They arrived in Yerevan late in the evening of July 19th. The city was decorated with flags, carpets, and greenery. Astafyan Street was crowded with people. Both sides of the street were lined with troops in formation, heroes of Sardarabad and Bashabaran. Following the commander's statements, the band started playing, accompanied by enthusiastic hurrahs emanating from thousands of throats. The festivities continued until the late hours of the night. The next day, the work of running a state had begun. The government started functioning on national soil.
In Yerevan, the composition of the government became clear. Thus, by moving the capital of the Armenian National Council and the government of Armenia in mid-July 1918 from Tbilisi, Armenian political life had a new life center, Yerevan. After the proclamation of Armenia's independence, the Armenian National Council faced another important issue: the formation of a parliament. During a time when there were no real means to hold comprehensive elections, the Armenian National Council, even before its official move to Yerevan, decided that it would be best to elect a future Armenian parliament through a system of proportional representation based on the number of political parties in the National Council. National minorities as well as non-partisans would also have representation in what was clearly meant to be a temporary parliament until the Constitutional Assembly called a comprehensive democratic election. The four parties of the Armenian National Council were represented in parliament by the following: the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, 18 members of parliament; the Armenian People's Party, 6 members of parliament; the Social Democrats, 6 members of parliament; the Social Revolutionaries, 6 members of parliament; and the non-partisans, 2 members of parliament. As a result, 38 Armenian members of parliament were included in Armenia's first parliament. Representatives of all the different nationalities living in the country were also included. The number of representatives was based on the total population of each nationality. Thus, 6 Turkish, 1 Russian, and 1 Kurdish representative were added, bringing the total number of parliamentarians to 46.
Agnuni, the noted ARF activist, in his letter, dated December 10, 1911, addressed to the ARF of America Annual Convention, writes the following lines: "Always look towards the homeland and have faith in its future. It's true, the red clouds of politics are piling up once more, but the soaring of freedom, although sluggish, even at a slow pace, remains unstoppable. I believe, with rock-solid faith, that before long, many of the present generation, even those of your small gathering still with no white hair and fortunate, will mature, will move up the steps of political struggle to end up occupying seats in the highest representative quorum of the Armenian people, the Armenian parliament, the very next dwelling of our victorious political struggle. And if someday one of you, my comrades, becomes deserving of that prodigious fortune, let him recall that what I say is no prophecy, but pure faith, unshakable faith in that road which, although slippery with blood, always leads to the victory fields of action and ideal." And sure enough, Agnuni's rock-solid faith turned to concrete reality one day. Armenia reinstated its lost sovereignty, and the Armenian parliament assembled in Yerevan.
The official opening of the Armenian parliament took place on Thursday, August 1st, 1918. One notable contemporary considered this day one of the most memorable days in Yerevan's history. The building that now houses the Hako Paronyan State Theater of Musical Comedy was used as the meeting place. The first session opened at 11:30 a.m. The people were gathered at the city park located just outside the building and on the sidewalks. Soldiers of the National Army were also lined up outside during the session.
The delegates were seated, each representing their political parties. The 6 delegates of the Armenian Democratic Party were seated on the right, since they were right-wing and believed in the free market and in capitalism. In the left were seated the Social Democratic, Menshevik, and Bolshevik delegates. And in the central wing were seated the 18 delegates of the ARF. In the back were seated the minority parties.
One of the quarters of the hall was outfitted for members of the government cabinet. A special place was also reserved for the Armenian Catholicos, Georg V, who happened to be absent that day. Delegates from Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Ukraine were present at the opening ceremony. The back of the hall and the top floor were occupied by the public. The solemn first session was opened by ARF member Avedik Sahakyan, the most senior parliamentarian. According to first-hand sources, his speech was received with great excitement and even occasionally interrupted by applause.
This day shall become a historic one, opening the gates of a luminous new era in the life of our young state's own political and economic development. This day shall remain memorable for the unique reason that for the very first time we see realized, within the narrow confines of our horizon, the beautiful dream and the sacred yearning for self-determination, albeit in impossibly dire conditions. Yes, our republic is small and constricting in its boundaries. It was deprived of its priceless territories and unable to contain its entire population, seemingly deprived of factors essential for an independent status. But I firmly believe that the boundaries of the country cannot remain frozen. I do believe that the boundaries of our country shall expand through the iron rule of life itself.
After Sahakyan's address, the Armenian tricolor was atop the parliament building as Mir Hayrenik played. The state flag of the Republic of Armenia had been adopted by the Armenian National Council and the Yerevan Council in July of 1918 during a joint session in Yerevan. Then, Sahakyan proposed for the parliamentarians to elect a chairperson of the National Assembly of Armenia. The ARF proposed Sahakyan's candidacy, which was supported by all factions except for the Social Democrats. Sahakyan was elected chair by open vote, and the parliamentary leadership was formed on the principle of a coalition.
The vice presidents were from the other political parties, and it was necessary that the majority be represented in the selection of the president. One vice president was Professor Krikor Der-Khachadurian from the Armenian Democratic Party. Another was Tavid Zubyan from the Social Democratic Party.
Following the first session, the first official military of the Republic of Armenia took place under the command of General Tovmas Nazarbekyan.
One eyewitness explained that the Armenian army marched along Yerevan's Astafyan, currently Apovyan Street. Thousands of spectators watched as tears rolled down their faces. Yes, that day, that moment was memorable. As Simon Vratsian once asked, the Armenian parliament, the Armenian government, the Armenian army, was it all a dream? Although the country's borders were much smaller than historic Armenia's, and although the people found themselves in the gravest of conditions those first days, the people of Armenia and those first leaders firmly believed that the Republic of Armenia existed. They were not wrong. All that was needed was a great deal of dedication and hard work. Emphasizing the idea that the National Assembly would be the supreme authority of the new republic, Sahakyan urged the parliamentarians to begin construction of the state building immediately.
Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունը եղել է պարլամենտական եվրոպական արժեքներ կրող.
The Republic of Armenia has been a parliamentary, democratic state with European values. There, the supreme authority was the parliament. In other words, the government and its members, the prime minister, were elected in the parliament, and his or her staff was represented by the parliament, and he or she was accountable to the parliament. In other words, the parliament could refuse him or her. This was a parliamentary system in Armenia. Let me also note that in our new constitution, we now have this system in Armenia, which is a positive step, since it promotes diverse views and ideas and allows for the representation of many different political parties. If the system was operated properly, the chances for error or improper action are minimal. A single person or single political party government is more likely to lead the country down a dangerous path.
Նաև միակ կուսակցական կառավարումը երկիրը կարող է տանել շատ վտանգավոր ինչ-որ եզրերի։
During 2.5 years of existence of the First Republic of Armenia, 2 parliaments were formed. The first, as the direct successor of the Armenian National Council, was formed without elections on a multi-party basis and functioned from August 1st, 1918 to June 5th, 1919. The second parliament was formed through proportional representation and functioned from August 1st, 1919 to December 2nd, 1920. The 2 parliaments of Armenia adopted over 300 laws, all of which played a significant role in the establishment of an independent Armenian state. Prime Minister Hovannes Khachaznouni's announcement of the composition of the government took place at the second sitting of the First Parliament on August 2nd, 1918. The government had in fact inherited a sad legacy: 10 to 12,000 square kilometers of arid land, a country of economic degradation and deprivation, and a multi-ethnic population of about 1 million people, 300,000 of which were refugees.
My government has come to power under exceptionally dire circumstances. It is expected to activate executive power in a state that has just come to life, still in its primary state of organization. The government has little from the past to lean on. It is not taking over from a previous government in order to continue an administering procedure already in place and running. It has to start everything from the beginning. It has to create a viable and functional body out of formless chaos and pile of ruins. These exceptional conditions already predetermine the nature of the government. It can never strive for multifaceted, fully workable results. It cannot initiate extensive planning and remains constricted to the resolution of most primary and urgent issues.
There were no serious issues in terms of financial development, foreign policies, and so forth, because it was unclear what was going to happen. The only issue that was put forth was deciding in this small nation how to defend its necessary powers. It was not surprising, then, that the first rule passed in Parliament was regarding the distribution of food. Therefore, for those families that had goods, a certain portion would be left to them to be able to have a living, and the rest would be taken for distribution to others, because there was no other means for survival for the nation. The writer of this rule was the Internal Affairs Minister, Manugyan, who understood the seriousness of the situation. The second rule passed in Parliament was with regards to housing, because there were officials coming from Tiflis, and there was nowhere to house them. Those homes that had 10, 15 rooms, there would be enough left for those families, and the remaining rooms offered to these officials.
Nonetheless, Armenia's new leadership went straight to work. There was much to do with little to no resources available. The state was being built on shaky grounds, harsh socio-economic conditions, and imminent threats from enemies, both foreign and domestic. Knowing the severity of the situation, the Parliament approved a bare-bones program and the work to preserve the remaining fragments of Armenian life on the last sliver of Armenian soil began.
And despite the uncertain future and the difficult socio-economic situation throughout the new republic, a real attempt was being made to create a truly democratic state, the embodiment of the national aspirations of a wounded people.